everybody. Today we're going to be looking at the leaders in Congress. We left off our last video talking about the roles of political parties. One of the main jobs of a political party is to establish leaders. Those leaders are in charge of making sure things get done in our government. Today we're going to look at Congress, but also at the Rhode Island General Assembly. Big reminder here. In terms of how our legislative branch works, we have bicameral Congress. Bicameral means two houses. This goes all the way back to when we were drafting the Constitution and we had the Great Compromise. You should recall that certain states, like small states like Rhode Island and Delaware, wanted each state to have the equal amount of votes. Big states like New York did not like this. New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, states with large populations, and they wanted to have representation to be based on population. So, voila, we have our Great Compromise. Remember James Madison, our favorite James Madison, our hero. He came up with the compromise. So our current structure is our bicameral. We have our House of Representatives. Representatives, right, that's based on representation. So small states with fewer people have fewer representatives, whereas states with larger populations have more representatives. And then we also have the Senate. In the Senate, everybody has two. So that's where we get our compromise. So let's look at the representatives. It says the balance of power in the U.S. House, 116th Congress. Where does that number 116th come from? Great question. We have elections every 2 years in the House of Representatives. However, we don't make it so that every 2 years, every person is up for re-election. Every 2 years, about a third of representatives, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, a third of them are up for re-election. So every 2 years, you have a new graph, right? A new makeup of Congress. So this is the 116th time that we've seen a new mix-up of who's there. Right now, we have 233 Democrats, 1 independent, and 195 Republicans. We have a note here. If you see these gray seats, these are vacancies that at the time were due to resignation of Katie Hill. We had Elijah Cummings pass away, Chris Collins resigned, Sean Duffy resigned, Duncan Hunter, and Mark Meadows. Some of them have been caught up in some scandals and decided to resign their post. But this is our makeup in the House of Representatives. In terms of leadership, so you should have correctly identified that Democrats were the majority party. So as the majority party, they get to control the show. In each House of Congress, the party in charge, or the majority party, gets to kind of set the rules and procedure for how things are handled on a day-to-day basis. The most important job in the House of Representatives is the Speaker of the House, okay? The Speaker acts as the leader of the House and combines several roles. They're the institutional role of presiding officer, so they call meetings to order, they determine the agenda, what things get put up for a vote, what things are discussed. They have the role of leader of the majority party in the House, right? So they're running a show. And they also are second in line to succeed the president. So if for any reason, awful reason, that the president and the vice president were unable to keep going, Nancy Pelosi in this time would take over. Very rare. That's never happened, though. We also have other leadership roles. So you have the majority leader on the Democrat side, that's Steny Holder. He represents the Democrats on the floor. Republican leader is Kevin McCarthy. Sometimes he's referred to as the minority leader. Why is he referred to as the minority leader? Because the Republicans are in the minority, meaning they have fewer people in power. The other major role here is the whip. So the whip on each side assists the leadership in managing the legislative program. So if Democrats are trying to push forward a vote on a certain bill, James Clyburn, the majority whip here, will be in charge of making sure all of his people are showing up on time, voting the correct way, and getting it done. Same for Steve Scalise, the Republican whip. You have the assistant speaker, right? This person assists Nancy Pelosi, and you have lots of other jobs. Basically, in Congress, you also have committees, right? Committees are in charge of looking at laws for specific issues. And within those committees, there's also leadership positions. So now we go to the Senate. You should notice that the Senate is much smaller. Right? We only have 100 people. Balance of power, we have 53 Republicans and 45 Democrats. We have 2 independents, but these independents caucus, meaning they vote with or work with more often Democrats. Let's look at the Republican leadership in the Senate. We have Mitch McConnell. He is the Senate president right now, Mitch McConnell. And again, his role is very similar to what Nancy Pelosi does in the House. Whenever the president, executive branch leader needs to, have a quick conference, he's going to be calling Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell, right? These are our top dogs in the Congress. We also have our majority whip, John Thune, Republican from South Dakota. If you notice also all these little parentheses, R dash, right? This indicates their party and then what state they represent. You also have, committee chair people, vice president, but really we need to mostly know who the Republican leader is. Okay, Democratic leadership. Again, the Democratic leader is Chuck Schumer, Charles Schumer. He's a Democrat from New York. Something interesting to note here is not a coincidence that at least 3 people on this page were running for president at one point. So again, leadership in the Congress also sometimes can be seen as a fast track to presidential nominations, right? Elizabeth Warren, vice chair of the Democrats in the Senate, she had run for president. Chair of the committee here, Amy Klobuchar, and then chairman of outreach, right, Bernie Sanders from Vermont. He is one of those independents, but he caucuses and works more with the Democratic leadership. So let's get into some numbers here. Let's look at some trends. As of 2020, women occupy 127 of the 537 seats in the U.S. Congress. So 23.7% of all Congress people are women. 105 of them are Democratic and 22 are Republican. If we look at it and break it down house by house, in the House of Representatives, women make up 23% of the seats, whereas in the Senate, women have a slightly bigger piece of the pie there. Women hold 26% of the jobs in the Senate. If we look at how that gets broken down by party, in the Democrats for the House, we have 88 Democrats are women in the House of Representatives, and 13 of those Republicans in the House are women. Whereas in the Senate, 17 of the Democratic senators are women and 9 are Republican. If we look at this in terms of racial makeup, right, composition of the House, we'll look at the Republicans first. We have white, non-white men and women. So, to kind of read this chart, you would analyze it almost like it was a T-chart. So white men, 179, non-white men, 8. Of the Republican women, 12 are white and 1 is non-white. When we look over at, and again, this is just our House Representatives. When we look at the Democrats, 91 of the men are white, 55 are non-white, whereas the women, 48 of them are white and 41 are non-white. So that's actually a pretty even number. Some interesting trends that have happened. It's been a record for diversity in Congress. I'll talk about these people in a minute, but let's look at this chart. So whenever we read a chart, we want to look at the title, read any notes at the bottom as well. We also want to look at the axis. So I notice here at the bottom, it looks like this data is broken apart into 4 different categories. We have our Native American population, Asian, Hispanic, and Black. So already I know this is not talking about any of the whites in Congress. It says growing racial and ethnic diversity. Number of non-white U.S. House and Senate members by race and ethnicity. In 2001, we can compare this number to the 2019. It says here, note, non-voting delegates and commissioners are excluded. Figures represent makeup of Congress on the first day of each session. In general, you don't need to know that much, but I'm going to give you a minute now to look at this graph and come up with some ideas. All right, if we look over here, just some things to know. Congress has not really been that diverse for a very long time, but just some cool things to point out. In this 116th Congress, Republican Lauren Underwood of Illinois, she became the youngest Black woman elected to Congress at 32. That is pretty young. Beating her record even higher, or by even lower, we have Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She is from New York City. She became the youngest woman ever, regardless of race, elected to Congress. And then Andy Kim of New Jersey became the first Asian American elected from New Jersey. We've had other Asian American congresspeople, specifically from California, but he was the first one from New Jersey to represent his state. In terms of the racial makeup of the House and the Senate, just kind of looking at it in a more specific way. Again, House is bigger because they have more members. In purple, we have our Asian American representatives. In green, our Hispanic. And in blue, our African Americans. So take a minute to look at these graphs, and you're going to answer some questions. All right, looking at our next graph. Racial composition of Congress over time. So this graph is really cool because it shows you a few different things. On the x-axis here, we have the Congress. So which iteration of Congress, right? From the very beginning, this would have been, 1789. We're now at the 116th Congress. The total amount of area is showing you how many total people there are. All right, if we look at this dip, this is going to be our Civil War time period. That's going to make a lot of sense because if you remember in the Civil War, half of the people were like, I'm going to head out. So in Congress, the numbers were really cut down because there weren't any Southerners sitting in Congress. So that's why you see this little blip. Also, that's when you first start to see any Black members of Congress. Why is that? Well, because Civil War's over and we have Reconstruction, we now have the 15th Amendment, which gives African American men the right to vote, and the 14th, which now made African American men citizens. If you're a citizen, you're eligible to run for Congress. So we see this jump here. We're coming back to the correct number of people in the House, but see how we had a lot, or the most amount of Black members ever? Think about what might have happened here. What might have happened to cause, we started having African Americans in Congress. Think about everything you've learned from the Civil Rights Movement. What is making it so for a long time those numbers really drop off? When we come here, we're also starting to see growing trends in other racial groups representing in Congress. So we pretty much had the same amount of people in Congress from the 80th to about now. But as you can see, the change up is happening. All right, lastly, let's take a look at Rhode Island. If you follow me on Instagram, you saw the other day, I ran up to our beautiful state house where our General Assembly meets. I was doing the Rocky Balboa up on the stairs. Great building. Our General Assembly. So we don't say the Rhode Island Congress. Okay, General Assembly is our name, but within that, we have our own state Senate and our own House of Representatives. If you think back to the last video that you watched, we talked about how one of the roles of a political party is to nominate to fill up these positions. Well, it's the same thing. It works at all levels of government. This is how it works at our state level. So again, it's a bicameral House. The Speaker of the House. Okay, again, this is the person, just like Nancy Pelosi, who's in charge of the House. Nicholas Mattiello is from Cranston. So in a way, Cranston has maybe a bit more influence in terms of deciding policy because the Cranston guy is the one running the show. And then we have the President of the Senate, Dominic Ruggerio. He is also a Democrat. So I want you to take a bit, look at the graphs here, and you're going to answer some questions. Okay, that's the end of this video. Make sure that all your answers were in full sentences, and I will talk to you guys later on. Thanks.